Hi, this is Mike Maloney, and on March 15th, the debt ceiling is back, so get ready for the Dog and Pony Show one more time. I'm going to show you some charts here of total budget expenditures for the United States. Then I'll show you a chart of surplus or deficit. And then I'm going to show you the total national debt, which is the accumulation of the surplus or deficit. So this chart, the Federal Reserve doesn't have one chart with all the data in it that I can find. So this chart starts back in 1879 and goes to 1915. I love all of this historic perspective. We were going along with an average of just over $20 million a month through the 1880s. And then in the 1890s, it jumps up to around $30 million a month, and then $40 million a month in the 1900s. And then in the 1910s, jumps up to around $60 million a month on the average. Then we go to the next chart, and this is that $60 million a month on the average expenditures that you saw in the last chart. Then World War II starts, and then we get into World War II, and the spending just explodes. Remember, this is the total expenditures. This is not surplus or deficit. This is everything that they're spending. So we go from millions, and then it gets into the billions here. 1,000 million is a billion. So it peaked at $2 billion that we were spending in a month during World War I. And then it comes back down and settles in on the $250 million range, spending about $250 million a month on the average throughout the 20s. Then we jump to the Great Depression in the 30s, and you can see we were at about $300 million a month or so average, and then it jumps up to about the $500 million a month average. And here is a $2.3 billion month in 1936. And then we get to 1930, the end of 1938, and I'll shift to a chart that starts in 39, and this is World War II. And now we're at $3 billion, $4 billion, $5 billion, $6 billion, $7 billion, $8 billion, and $9.6 billion per month that they were spending on World War II. It drops back down, and this is the drop down, and there's the late 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And now I'm just going to shift to the surplus or deficit. That was total spending. Now we're going to take a look at how much they either have left over or how much they have to borrow to be able to spend. And this is the deficits of World War I, $9 billion, $13 billion. And these are the deficits of World War II, $54 billion, $47 billion, and so on. And then we go off of the Bretton Woods system in 71, and we're no longer attached to gold, and deficits just exploded. And here we are with a $1.4 trillion deficit. But if I take this time scale here and shift it, you'll see there's World War II sort of zooms up, and then World War I, you can see the deficit. But all through the 20s, when we're spending $250 million a month, we had $900 million surplus. So all through the 20s, the expenditures were low, and they were actually paying off World War I. So we were reducing the total national debt by having monthly surpluses, spending less than their income to get out of the debt that was left over from World War I. My point here is that before World War I, they didn't have a debt ceiling. And whenever they wanted to come out with some programs or do some expenditures that were beyond their income, they not only had to vote for those programs, Congress and the Senate fighting over passing certain programs and so on and services, but then they had to vote on the bond issues and the expenditures that they were going to make. Whenever there was a deficit, the Constitution required them to vote on this extra money that they were spending, the extra currency that they were spending. And so each time here, they had twice as much work. They fought over the programs, and then they fought over borrowing the currency to afford those programs. When World War I came along, they they created the debt ceiling so that they would figure out how much they thought they were going to do in deficit spending over the next year or two, and they would set a ceiling there, and then they didn't have to vote for it each time. And so if you add every one of the deficits together, whenever it's below the zero line, and then you subtract from that total each one of the surpluses, you get the accumulated deficit. So they were subtracting from that total and lowering the deficit all the way through the 20s to pay for World War I, and then they did it a little bit right after World War II. But then we just sort of carried this running balance of a fairly large debt, and then we disconnected from gold in 1971, and we continued doing this reckless spending, and we've been doing it ever since, and now we're in the trillions, not the millions. And one thing you want to notice here, this recession, or this economic expansion, the white area of this, is now longer than this economic expansion, and it's longer than this economic expansion. 14 months from now, it will overtake this. So right now, we are the third longest economic expansion in history. It's going to be the second 14 months from now, and 14 months after that, it would become the longest in history. So the odds are that there is a recession around the corner, and we're already spending more than $500 billion. This is annual data now, so $500 billion per year more than our income. And so when the next recession happens, this is going to explode. And the current administration has plans to expand the deficit anyway. The accumulation of the deficit or surplus gives you the total national debt. And here we see it go along from 1966 until today. And I'm going to zoom up into just the 2010s here, because what you see here is us running in to the debt ceiling a few times. And back in 2013, we ran into the debt ceiling, and once they run into the debt ceiling, this national debt supposedly doesn't grow. But what's interesting, there was a 16-day shutdown at the end of this debt ceiling disaster. And in 2015, we ran into the debt ceiling again. And what they do is they kept the government open during this whole debt crisis. And what they do is they do a bunch of intergovernmental borrowing and so on. So it's a bunch of smoke and mirrors accounting where they're borrowing from one department and giving to another. Any place that has surpluses, they're doing emergency maneuvers to keep from shutting down the government completely and defaulting on our bonds. Now, our credit rating was lowered because of these debt ceiling disasters, and we're about to run into another one again. But what's interesting here is if you took a line and you connected these peaks, you'd have almost a straight line from here to there, and that's what they were actually spending. This debt ceiling was just an illusion. It wasn't real. They did keep on spending when they hit the debt ceiling. And then as soon as the new debt ceiling is put in place, they do a whole bunch of expenditures and pay back the departments that they borrowed from and so on. And so it increases at a faster rate and then levels off again to the average rate that they were spending at. And really, it's time to learn more about this again. In my episode 4 of Hidden Secrets of Money, there's about a minute and a half of how the debt ceiling works. I encourage you to watch that. There's a link at the end of this video. Thank you very much for listening. This is Mike Maloney. If you got anything from this, please subscribe to our channel, like our video, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for listening.